Hey, welcome. My name is Rachel Smith, and this is the Natural Health Rising podcast. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and the owner of Natural Health Rising, which is my online holistic functional medicine company where I help people who have autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses, mystery symptoms, and a whole host of other imbalances restore their health by natural means. On this podcast, you're going to hear conversations between myself and other health experts on functional medicine and general holistic health. My goal is to provide you with the tools you need in order to help you rise to your healthiest and happiest self. On this episode, I have Michael Biamonte with me. Michael is the founder of the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. He is a co-creator of Biocybernetics, which is an unprecedented computer software program that is able to study blood work, mineral tests, and many other lab tests to determine exactly where your body is imbalanced, initially designed for aerospace purposes. As a practitioner for over 30 years, he is dedicated to improving the lives of his patients and helping them get back to living. He holds a doctorate of naturopathy and is a New York State certified clinical nutritionist. He is a professional member of the International and American Association of Clinical Nutritionists, the American College of Nutrition, and is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board. He is listed in the Directory of Distinguished Americans for his research in nutrition and physiology. What a long list of accolades. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'd love to know a little bit more about what got you started into this whole clinical nutrition field in the first place.
I would say it started when my father had cancer when I was an impressionable teen. And I started questioning the doctors as to why they weren't giving him any vitamins or what was the role of nutrition. And they just brushed me off and said, no, this doesn't make a difference. And really, I didn't believe that. It didn't make sense to me. So I started gradually studying on my own.
Wow. That's that's really powerful. So once you started studying and then did you ever have anything with your own health that made you like anything going on with your own personal disease states or symptoms that nutrition helped you with?
I had eczema when I was born and as a young adult, and I started to see connections between my diet and a lot of things. And I eventually cured myself of it backwards because what I did was instead of directly approaching the cause, which was Candida, I was doing all these things to increase my ability to detoxify and helping my immune system, and my body overcame it on its own, which is very rare. That's not something that's typically going to happen. That's the hard way to do it. I've
Okay.
since learned the easier way.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we can get more into that. Well, you brought up Candida, so I'd love to talk more about like what exactly is Candida and what are common symptoms of that?
Well, Candida is a yeast which is commonly found in your vaginal area or your intestinal tract. It's an interesting organism because technically it's called a dimorphic organism, which means the word dimorphic means the ability to live in two different states. So it is a yeast, but it can flip itself into a fungus, like a chameleon would flip itself into a different color and shade. Candida can do the same thing. And Candida is relatively innocent as long as it's a subdominant part of your microbiome. The problem is if it starts to overgrow, it's toxic. And it's one of the most insane booby traps you'll ever see in terms of what it can do to your body. What controls it is friendly probiotics that we all hear about on TV. Probiotics suppress the activity of Candida, and it's like a food chain. The probiotics eat the Candida and suppress it and keeps it under control. But if you get rid of the probiotics, you've disturbed the food chain, and now the Candida is left to run wild, which is what
Mm.
happens. It then begins to overgrow. And when it starts to overgrow, it can cause damage to the body, just like cancer can. It can literally eat into your organs and glands like cancer. But what's also interesting is it releases a whole host of toxins which interfere with your immune system and your ability to detoxify. What typically happens is when the person take something that disrupts their biome, which would normally be like antibiotics or prednisone, cortisone, antacid pills, anything that disrupts your biome, the candida starts to overgrow. Initially, the person starts to feel sluggish, they start to feel tired, and they start having memory problems. Then they start noticing they have digestive problems. Then it goes on to altitude like rashes, all of these other symptoms to the point where they can then eventually become what we used to call a universal reactor, which nowadays we look at it a little bit differently. But a universal reactor is someone who just reacts to everything, and they
Mm-hmm.
typically become housebound because they're so chemically sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's thought of as being like a mast cell activation and all these more specific terms, but this can eventually happen. The person can become highly allergic, and if they happen to develop leaky gut, which is a sister of this condition, they then start to become uh, very chemically sensitive to the point where they have to be shut in inside.
Mm-hmm.
They can't go out and handle the air pollution.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
can
Or like,
develop arthritis also. There's a really wide spectrum of illnesses that you can develop from having candida. But the problem is people would never identify it to candida unless they understood the whole game of how it works.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And would you also say, like people who, like women who have chronic UTIs or yeast infections, like vaginal yeast infections, also is another sign that the microbiome is imbalanced.
This is the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm.
A woman with chronic UTIs or chronic vaginal infections is concerned about that symptom, of course, but that's not the problem. That's not where you treat. It's even you can look this up in the Merck manual, which is a book most doctors have in their office. The Merck manual actually will say that you have to concurrently treat vaginal infections with intestinal or systemic candida, because what's happening is the yeast from the intestinal tract is gradually doing two things. It's bleeding over to the vaginal area, and it's also suppressing the entire immunity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why vaginal infections and UTIs will go on unless you actually treat the candida in your gut, which is the main place that it is living. It's like a garden. You could think of it that way. This whole thing is like gardening. You have weeds and you have the nice flowers and grass and whatnot. And in this case, the weeds have taken over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up that some of the conventional treatments, someone might think they need to treat that specific area, but it goes so much farther beyond that. So talking about traditional treatments, like let's say somebody goes to the doctor and the doctor says, "Oh, we need to give you antifungals or something like diflucan." Can you talk a little bit more about what those traditional treatments are for candida and why those don't actually work?
Well, the main problem is that the candida develops a drug resistance to them. After about 21 days or so of being exposed to any medication, even an herb that's antifungal, candida will start to mutate and become drug resistant to that herb or that medicine.
Mm-hmm.
We typically we in quite some years ago, we used to culture stool samples in my office, and we rarely found anybody came to us who had Candida albicans, because people were coming to us who had a wide, expansive history of Candida, and they knew it, and they'd been to one doctor after the next, done all these self treatments. Their Candida had already been driven to a mutation. So we typically would see the people with Candida tropicalis and Candida glabrata. It was very rare that we saw anybody who had Candida albicans.
Mm-hmm.
And this is as a result of the drug driving the Candida to becoming resistant. The other problems with the drugs is they're very toxic, and it's very difficult to stay on those drugs long enough. Theoretically, if you were able to stay on those drugs for 6 or 7 months without damaging your liver and your kidneys, which typically would happen, you might have a shot at the drug eliminating the candida. You might, but it still wouldn't happen because the drugs are not broad spectrum in the manner that they need to be. See, a person who has candida truly has an illness that we better called dysbiosis. And dysbiosis means the person has an imbalance between the sum total of all the bad organisms and the good ones. So you're never going to find somebody who only has candida. The typical candida patient has microscopic parasites, they have dysbiotic bacteria, they have like a zoo going on down there. It's not a very happy place. Candida stands prominent because Candida is one of the organisms that produces the greatest, let's say, potential pathogenic reactions in the body. But it's not the only one that's going to repel the friendly bacteria. The whole game with Candida is simply to get the Candida low enough in population so that the probiotics can take over when you take them. That's the game. And it's hard. It's not as simple as I just said, as I just made it sound, because the typical person who takes probiotics doesn't get well. That's why we're talking. If all the people out there that took probiotics got rid of their Candida like it's thought, then I would not be seeing 60 to 80 people a week dealing with this. That wouldn't happen. The problem is with probiotics is they're repelled by Candida, and they're repelled by other dysbiotic organisms. When the probiotic tries to reattach itself to the lining of the intestinal tract, it's literally repelled, like with magnets, where you get the both ends together and one pushes the other one away. This is what typically happens. So that's the game, is to get the Candida low enough, and then particularly to destroy the Candida that's deep in the intestinal tract that specifically does repel those probiotics. That's kind of the game. And in order to do it, you got to go through different phases or different individual treatments, just like you were peeling an onion. You've got to rip away layers of it until you can get deep enough to finally get that bottom layer, get rid of that layer, and then the probiotics were able to reattach. And now generally you'll get well at that point.
Yeah. And you were saying that the drug resistant Candida after 21 days, as well as for herbs. So you're swapping these herbs every 21 days as well with more natural treatments.
Generally, when we treat people, we rotate the therapeutic herbs every 4 to 7 days, depending on which stage we're in. If we're using herbs or naturopathic remedies that kill systemically, we tend to switch them every 4 days. When we use the ones that kill deep in the intestinal tract, we switch them every 7. But you're right, that is the concept. If you don't rotate the herbs, you're just going to drive your Candida into drug resistance. I can't tell you how many times I heard the story. The patient comes in, he says, I went to Dr. Such and Such. He says I had Candida, put me on this treatment. First 3 months, I was getting better. Then I stopped getting better. It slowly, gradually stopped working. So he raised the doses even higher, and then I felt even worse. I've heard the story a million times. And this is why. It's due to the drug resistance that Candida goes through.
Yeah. And then there's also this connection between all of the things that Candida feeds on. And so that's definitely, I know that's so important to take care of either before or during the process of doing this. So can you talk a little bit more about some of those things like parasites, heavy metals, different minerals, and how those imbalance? We can start one by one if you want. If we want to start with like parasites
let's take up diet first.
Okay, great.
You're never going to get rid of Candida unless you do a Candida diet.
Yep.
But a Candida diet will never get rid of Candida.
Right.
That's the oxymoron to it. The reason why this occurs is because when you starve the Candida of sugars and starches, which is what it feeds on, the colonies weaken. It's very similar to a weed that's not getting watered. And before you know it, this big tall weed has now fallen, and there's very little of it left to see. But then when you get a good rain, the weed starts to come back. The good rain would be synonymous with feeding it all kinds of carbs and sugars. The reason why this occurs is Candida grows a root-like system. Most people don't know this, but Candida is a plant. One of the things we use to kill Candida is cellulase, which is the enzyme that digests cellulose. And that's what plants are made of. They're made of cellulose. Candida is it's like having broccoli growing in your intestines, and it's growing roots that will pierce your little capillaries, your little blood vessels. And it's doing that to look for sugar. So theoretically, if someone fasted, a lot of the Candida would die, but the roots are still going to be tapped into your capillaries and drawing glucose. So that root system is going to stay alive. That's why it's common that we see people who've been on a Candida diet for 10 years, and they'll tell me that as long as they're on the diet, they're fine. Then if something happens and they get off the diet, all their symptoms come back just like it was never gone. So, and this is why.
Wow. Yeah. I definitely talk to a lot of people who say that they've done that as well. And it's so much deeper than just using nutrition. Um, and maybe share a little bit if somebody doesn't know what is the Candida diet. So for you, can you explain what's taken out and what's really focused on for people?
Candida diets are different out there. If you go on the internet, you find lots of different diets. And the
Hmm.
reason why there's so many different ones is because everybody has their own unique theory. And usually the unique theory came about in terms of what worked for them individually, which of course then that's not scientific because that's assuming that one size fits all. The Candida diets that we use are based on the amount of carbohydrate and starch, depending on how bad their test levels are. The higher the Candida is, the more restrictive of a diet we put them on. And then as the levels of Candida drop, the diet loosens up. There's
Hmm.
also the matter of whether or not the person has leaky gut. If a person has leaky gut syndrome, raw food and fermented food become their biggest enemies, just as bad as the sugar or starch. And then the other thing that we look at is their blood type, because we know that in the blood types, the type A is going to be able to handle more carbs because that's per their genetics than the type O, let's say. So when we design the diet for the person, we take all three things into account. We take, do they have leaky gut? What's their blood type? And how bad are their Candida levels? We take that into consideration in constructing the diet for them. We don't just throw them on the same diet we give everybody
Hmm.
because that's not scientific, of course. But that's the key thing. If we want to strip it down to what is the key, it's the avoidance of sugar and starch because those items feed the Candida and make it grow.
Hmm.
The worst of all is maltose, which is malt sugar. Malt sugar makes Candida grow like you throwing gasoline on a fire, let's say.
Right. Okay. Um, and so just out of curiosity, how long are these people normally doing your protocols for? Is it 3 months, 6 months? Obviously, it depends a little bit depending upon, like you said, like the severity of it.
It's very funny because you hear all these things on the internet from multi-level companies that are making things that are supposed to get rid of Candida. And I read these things and I'm hysterical when I read them because they'll still say we get rid of Candida in a few weeks or whatnot.
Yeah.
And I have the advantage of being able to test the person every 4 to 6 weeks and watch their Candida levels. So I know that it's going to be a minimum of 9 months. The person's going to
Hmm.
be on an actual Candida elimination. It will take 9 months to reduce the Candida, and then to get their intestinal flora to come back and grow, it's usually another 3 months. So you can round it off to a year that they're going to be on the diet, or at least diet conscious.
Hmm.
It'll take about a year. So when people read or hear about these cures that are supposed to take place in a few weeks or months, you have to keep in mind that there's no testing involved. When you ask them, well, how do you know the product worked? Well, the person feels much better. Well, I can give them heroin and they're going to feel much better. What is that? That doesn't prove anything.
Hmm.
Show me a test that shows the Candida was at this level before they took your product, and now it's at this level. That's what I want to see. I want to see an actual test that proves to me that it dropped and reduced. And of course, you're never going to find that in those circumstances.
Right, right. No, I totally agree. Whenever I put people on plans, they're like, wow, it's going to take how many months? And they're like, I've never heard that before, but it really does take a long time to get rid of these things. Um, awesome. So let's talk about minerals a little bit because I know there's a big connection between different things like copper and selenium and these different minerals and candida and even other things like viruses. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, as far as minerals go, the minerals that make Candida worse, generally speaking, are copper, arsenic, mercury, and aluminum. Each of those elements has a property to it that will fire Candida up. If, as a matter of fact, it's interesting if you look at drugs, the prescription drugs. One of the most popular prescription drugs that addresses Candida works by blocking the Candida's ability to absorb iron.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're keeping that in mind, you necessarily wouldn't want to take iron then if you had Candida. That wouldn't make sense. Another drug blocks the Candida's ability to absorb vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, if you think on that, it wouldn't make too much sense to take vitamin D if you have Candida. And I very typically hear from my patients that once they just across the board stop all their supplements, they generally feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. We see so many people nowadays taking iron supplements because they're told they're anemic, and that's a whole nother story. But
Well,
go ahead.
it's a whole other story, but I can summate the whole thing.
Yeah.
Candida absorbs iron from your diet, and it robs you of iron. So it's like a parasite. In Latin, the word parasite means to eat off the table of another. And that's exactly Candida should be classified as a parasite because that's what it's doing. It's robbing your own body of the nutrients. But unfortunately, when the solution becomes putting those nutrients back in, the problem is the Candida is right there with its hand out looking to eat them. And then as it eats them, it becomes more powerful. So that becomes the problem.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Normally, like the iron issue, for example, it's like a mixture of maybe some imbalances in other minerals, leaky gut, the candida going on, parasites. Like we have all this dysbiosis, and that's really causing that iron imbalance. But once all that stuff is fixed, and we can definitely get people hopefully off of those iron supplements and everything. So what about hormone levels? So there is a connection between estrogen and sex hormones and candida. Can you talk a little bit about that and explain what that relationship is?
Oh yeah. Well, before we do that, just one last thought on the minerals.
Yeah.
There are two minerals that when you're deficient in them, you become more susceptible to Candida,
Mm-hmm.
and that's copper. But when copper becomes toxic in your body, it can also set Candida off. Copper
Right.
and selenium are the two that if you're deficient in them, you're more prone. Also magnesium. So I should forget that.
Mm-hmm.
Magnesium, copper, and selenium. If you're deficient, if you do a test and you're found to be low in them, you're more susceptible to Candida. But as far as hormones grow, it's really very simple. There are two hormones that tend to exacerbate Candida. They're estrogen and cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
And what they have in common is both estrogen and cortisol elevate the glucose levels in the tiny capillaries in your intestines. So that gives the Candida more food for thought, so to speak. Testosterone deficiency can also make you more prone to Candida. And the interesting thing is estrogen deficiency can. So either too much estrogen or not enough can do the same thing. Cortisol typically elevates when the person has stress. And cortisol does a few things that promote Candida. The first thing is it suppresses your intestinal immune reaction. Fecal IgA and IgE are suppressed by cortisol. Cortisol depresses your general immunity. It elevates the sugar in your little blood vessels, and all those things make Candida grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you say that, I mean, this is what I believe. I'm just curious on your thoughts. Like it's always important to do a combination of mineral testing, hormone testing, and probably some gut testing or something related to the candida if this is their problem.
Yes, I would agree with that. That is true. That's typically what we've done that for years in people who have Candida because you want to get an idea of what the underlying reasons are at the same time because it makes it easier to handle some of those cofactors that are going on. But what you've got to, the one thing you can't lose sight of is the fact that you must treat the Candida foremost
Mm-hmm.
because lowering their hormones, handling other things is not necessarily going to get rid of the Candida. Once the Candida is grown there, you have to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So kind of addressing everything together, making sure you're taking care of that while you're balancing out everything else.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work that well. It's too much at once usually for the person to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to end up with a compliance issue. Then you also have the fact that a lot of the things you're going to want to give the person to balance them could also aggravate the Candida.
Mm-hmm.
So it's better that it's done in stages, unless it's really something that's out of control. If a person really has sky high levels of mercury, you might have to bleed some of the mercury out first. But interesting, there's a practitioner in the Midwest who I'm not going to name, but I've gotten many patients from his practice who all tell me the same story. They say that he sat me down, he explained I had Candida, he showed it to me on the test, and he showed me my mercury levels. They were really high. And he told me that I can't get rid of the Candida until I get rid of the mercury. So he put me on this program to get rid of the mercury. And it all makes sense. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is when you do it and you start to pull that mercury out of your tissues and it starts to enter your intestinal tract, guess what's there to absorb the mercury? the Candida, and it flares
Mm-hmm.
the Candida up. So
Mm-hmm.
it becomes a situation where almost where the treatment is worse, the cure is almost worse than having the problem because it's flaring the problem up. That's how I discovered that you had to address the Candida first before you could address the toxic metals. It's just simplicity. Because if you try to do it the other way around, the person usually flares up so much that they can't handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Are you big on having people do things to stimulate, like things to support their liver or lymphatic drainage when they're going through all of this detoxification of this candida and everything?
Yes, but we do it all in phases. As if you read my book, you'll see in my book we talk about the five phases. So we
Mm-hmm.
start in phase 0, which is a testing phase. In phase 0, we actually use things that are like part of a candida colon cleanse in order to provoke the candida and loosen it up to make it show more easily on the test. So we'll typically do a provoked urine test. We have a baseline urine test where we get their baseline levels of organic acids relating to candida. Then we put them on the phase 0, and then we do a follow-up, a provoked test. And very often we'll see the levels go higher the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not because the person got worse. That's telling you that the person has very deep rooted candida. And as we're pulling it out or draining it off, the organic acid level shot up, they went higher. Okay, so we know that. Now we'll put the person on the first phase. And on the first phase of the program, we're rotating systemic antifungals. We usually give the person 4 different ones. And as they're rotating those, we're watching their levels of candida using the urine test. We're looking for the levels to go up, because if the levels go up, we know we're getting die off because these organic acids are being produced in live or dead candida. So we're looking for a spike at some point showing that they're getting die off. Then the spike will level off. And when it comes back down, we know the die off from that phase is over. Then they go to phase 2. In phase 2, we use antifungals, which are fatty acid based, which have the ability to go deep into the crevices of the intestines and kill that candida that's really deep rooted that you can't get by using other products.
Mm-hmm.
That's the candida that repels the probiotics. So we do that, and we're looking again for the same thing. We're waiting for that curve to spike. The curve goes up and then it comes down again. That tells us we're finished with those. And at that point, we usually have the candida low enough where they'll respond to the probiotics. Now, if the person has leaky gut, we need to handle the leaky gut before they go on the probiotics, because people with leaky gut are notorious for having horrible reactions to probiotics. Let's say now they finish the probiotic program. The first thing we do is test them for chemical toxicities and metal toxicities, because these are the things which will get entrapped in their body if they have candida, because candida sort of disarms your phase 1 and phase 2 detox pathways.
Mm-hmm.
So we check them for metal and chemical detox problems. If we find something, we detox them. If when the detox is over, now we assess all their amino acids, their neurotransmitters, their hormones, their vitamins, their minerals, and everything, because now we basically have them at a clean slate, you see. So now we address all their nutrient imbalances. When we have all their nutrients, their hormones, their neurotransmitters, everything balanced, the last thing we do is specifically look at their immune system. And we look to see if there's anything in the immune system that we need to reset. And what we found that works the best to reset the person's immune system are a lot of Chinese herbal products, which are able to increase the killer cells and the B cells and the T cells and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I've just taken you through a quick lineup. That's exactly how we do it. And that's the order we do it. And doing it in that order, I have found over the last 30 years of doing this can be really important, because if you do it out of order, sometimes it could aggravate things. Like, for instance, antioxidants as in general act as antidotes for most antifungals. Most products that kill dysbiotic bacteria, parasites, all have one thing in common. How they kill is by creating oxidative stress against the membrane of the microbe.
Mm-hmm.
Artemisia is very probably one of the most obvious choices if you wanted to examine one particular product that did that. Hydrogen peroxide is obviously another. Any ozone, anything oxygenating. So there are so many products that kill these microbes by creating oxidative stress. So if you take a lot of antioxidants, what happens?
Oh, are you
You're
asking
going to
me
reduce the oxidative stress. No, I'm just
Yes,
saying, you know,
yes.
rhetorical.
Okay. Yes.
You're going to reduce the oxidative stress, and you're going to dramatically drop the efficiency of that killer that you're trying to use.
Correct.
So that would be one reason why we wouldn't want to do this, is we want to get the person through the elimination stage of the candida as quickly as possible, because the sooner they get done with that, the sooner they're off the diet, essentially. So
Okay.
this is a reason. And then, as I said before, there are certain nutrients will actually feed candida and make it grow. Like CoQ10 will do that. Vitamin D will do that. Iron will do that. Some of the other minerals we talked about, they'll all do that. They're actually favoring the candida's growth, so they'll actually enhance it. So we don't want to do that. So therefore, it's the simplest way to get through this is to make sure we're doing things in sections. Where on that section we're doing this one thing, and we're not going to throw anything else in there to offset it.
No, I definitely love that approach. It's very systematic and also, like you said, like making sure you're not overwhelming the body in itself as well.
There's only some, you know, but and it goes back to just some basic simplicity for a patient. So I've had patients come to me and they came with these lists. They said, "This is the last doctor I was seeing had this is what he had me taking." And I'm looking at this list and it's like the inventory of a health food store. Saying, what didn't you take? It becomes after a while. What supplement did you not take? And that just doesn't work. It's too much. Your body can't process all those things. It misdirects. In homeopathy, one principle, guiding principle in homeopathy, is if you give the person too many things, the body doesn't know what to listen to.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
I'm saying it in a tongue-in-cheek way. You know, they say it in a bit more of a sophisticated way, but that's what the bottom line is. If you overload the person with too many medicines, the body doesn't know what to do. So if you keep it focused on what the main point is that you want to accomplish, you'll get it done much faster. And experience has taught me this is 100% true over the last 30 years.
Since you brought up supplements a little bit more, what do people need to know about herbal supplements, nutritional supplements, and how do they actually like correctly and safely use them?
First thing is you got to be really careful of who your manufacturer is. You want to make sure you know the manufacturer and they're reputable, because it's unfortunate that you find a lot of herbal products, including the Chinese herbals, have toxic metals in there. So you want to make sure that the product doesn't. After that point, you need to understand that if you're taking something that's germicidal or antimicrobial, that if you continue to take it too long, whatever organisms you're trying to kill could create a drug resistance. That even would go for Klebsiella and Citrobacter and all of those microbes. It holds true for them too. So you want to make sure that you don't take the same medicine without giving it a break of about 2 weeks at some point, and then restarting it.
Okay.
The other thing to know is that the correct dose may not be what the manufacturer has on the label. The manufacturers are very rote in terms of what they put on the label. We found that in some cases, the actual therapeutic dose of the product was 3 times higher than what the manufacturer had. But yet you'll see other people who will respond much faster. Like blood type A's, for instance, can respond in a very short time to even a smaller dose, which is an interesting thing. But it's good for the practitioner to know that and think with that if he has a blood type A, they could respond faster and at a lower dose. But that's the type of thing you may only learn from experience. You see, it's not something that necessarily going to be taught in school.
How could the average consumer check out for these types of impurities, or is there a way for someone, because I see it all the time, people just watch a TikTok video or an ad on Facebook and they wind up with what I call the supplement graveyard, which is like 50 different things in their cabinet, or like you said, some practitioner recommends a million things and then they just have all these things. A lot of people don't know what they're even looking for. Can you give any advice or direction on like what should someone even look for when they're checking out a supplement?
Well, if they're curious about the purity, you can write to the company and you can ask for a copy of the third-party assay.
Mm-hmm.
Because reputable companies do third-party assays. They have another company that specializes in assaying supplements, take their product and do a whole analysis of it. And they're supposed to report back to that company if they find anything in there that's not good or shouldn't be in there. So you can certainly request a copy of the assay. If they give you some story and you never get a copy of it, then I think that answers your question too.
I've had that happen to me. I don't remember exactly what the product was, but this was because this was a couple years ago. But I wrote to the company and they would not release the information. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm not using your product.
You
I don't
know,
trust it.
I would have to guess they didn't have a third party assay, or if they did, they had invested in so much raw material that was polluted that they maybe didn't want to. That's again, that's a financial issue for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But certainly doesn't mean you have to take the product.
Right. Going back a step here, do you feel like there's anything really important that we missed when we were talking about Candida that, any big misconceptions or anything that you really love to share about this topic?
There's a few. The one first big misconception is people don't understand you have to rotate antimicrobials, and that holds true with parasites, it holds true with bacteria. And people have heard of the concept of the super strain or the drug resistant strain. Problem is, it's what they don't understand. It's right in their backyard. It's the very organisms a lot of times they were trying to treat are susceptible to this easily. And if they treat based on the mono approach of taking this one product and thinking it's going to work and just knock everything out, they're in for trouble. They're in for a situation where they've now educated their microbes to be super strong, and it's not going to work. So there's the first thing. The second misconception is that this concept that probiotics are just going to make everything go away, which is not happening either. Before you get to the point of taking probiotics, you have to really strip and clean the intestinal tract down because the dysbiotic organisms are going to repel it. Next thing is that probiotics have to be accompanied by a host of prebiotics. Luckily, I happen to know the whole list of them. I'll give you an example of some of them. There's a product biology research group that's called C-Curel, which is an herbal product which actually helps the bifidus come back in your intestines. It's very difficult to get bifidus to return in your intestinal tract because when you take bifidus orally, by the time it gets to your intestinal tract, it's usually dead. Mm-hmm. So the only successful way I have found to get bifidus back in people is to have them take this product called C-Curel and then also have them implant the bifidus directly into their colon using an enema or some such device. That's standard on my program. I don't give people bifidus orally and expect that it's going to grow. And that's because over the years, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of stool tests on people who were taking bifidus orally. And I got to see those zeros keep coming in on us. And it wasn't until we got them on this product, C-Curel, and had them start literally implanting the bifidus directly that we ever saw bifidus return.
Mm. That's really cool. That reminds me of fecal transplants and how we have these people who want to lose weight, and so they do a fecal transplant with someone who has a less weight, and that microbiome transfer allows them to do that. So that's really cool that you guys do that with the probiotics, essentially.
Yeah, I think that that's the better way to go. I think that when you're doing a fecal transplant, well, what if you happen to do a transplant with somebody who has bad biome and doesn't know it? That's a risk.
Right.
And that's why we have probiotics at our availability. So that's I would tend to lean in that direction. That's a much better way to go. But that's the way that works. See, everything I tell you is based on what I have found works. It's from the College of Hard Knocks. It's from doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
As much as I sound like an expert who's doing it all right, I did it all wrong before I learned to do it all right. So I know what works and what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
The other concept we'll go back to is like if you're taking you're trying to kill Candida, but you're taking all these vitamins, all these antioxidants, all these supplements. That's another thing that's risky because you don't know if you're feeding your Candida with the supplements and you don't know whether or not you're impeding the action of the antimicrobial. So there's another one we can put in that list.
Okay, awesome. I want to touch on the probiotics again. So, a big thing that a lot of people will say is that Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast-based probiotic, essentially,
It's
is
actually
what.
a prebiotic.
Okay, great.
Technically, it
Thank
should
you.
be
Yeah.
called a prebiotic.
Okay. Now, does that hold true with your protocols with once you do get to that phase? Because I know you said you
Mhm.
wait, but like once you get there, is that one of the major ones that's important?
That's one of the prebiotics that we use. So far I've disclosed that we use sea curl and we also use Saccharomyces. There's about 9 others
Mm-hmm.
and the reason why they're needed is because if we don't know exactly why. No one has ever nailed this down. But when someone has had candida for a long time, something happens to the intestinal tract. And I don't know what it is. I'm not going to speculate. But something happens to the intestinal tract that makes it harder for the probiotics to reinoculate.
Mm-hmm.
So the use of all these prebiotics is something that balances that out and it allows the probiotics a better chance to be able to come back and stick. Here's another problem is people who use probiotics which aren't human strain. In the industry, there's nicknames that are used for probiotics. One is either human strain or the other nickname is sticky strain. They both are the same thing. And if your probiotic is not a sticky strain or a human strain, it doesn't stick to the lining of your intestines, so it goes in your mouth and out in the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have to know which companies make sticky strain or human strain.
Right.
That becomes the next clue. Ones I'll tell you I know for a fact is Metagenics. All the probiotics from Metagenics are human strain and sticky strain.
Mm-hmm.
So that I know for an absolute fact because I've seen the assays. With other companies, I can't attest to, but I can attest that Metagenics makes those.
Okay. Yeah, that's a pretty popular company. What about prebiotic foods? Do you suggest those for people
We
to help?
normal When a person gets to that part, that stage as you were talking about, what we normally do that seems to work the best is we have them put all the probiotics, all the prebiotics in a blender and have them put yogurt or kefir or something like that in there as a base. And they make the whole thing into a drink or a smoothie.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
is while we're having them also implant the bifidus.
Mm-hmm. And is it just the supplement prebiotics, or are you doing like, green banana or asparagus or artichoke, like any of these other foods that are known to be more prebiotic based foods?
We tried that.
Okay, didn't work.
Didn't go over big.
Got it.
People that just didn't get like putting an artichoke in their smoothie.
Oh, well, yeah.
Didn't really catch on too well. Which is why we have the supplements which contain all those properties and the products that they can then put in the smoothies. But wherever possible, it's certainly a good idea that you make the base of the probiotic drink from yogurt or kefir or strawberries and different things that have prebiotic properties. It's certainly a good idea.
Hmm.
But then you're eventually gonna run into how does this taste and what is this. You tell someone to put an artichoke like in there, it's just that doesn't go over. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've never told anyone to put an artichoke in their smoothie, but I was just naming some foods. I don't think that would taste very good.
no.
On the topic of nutrition, like once people get through this whole year-long process, do you have any recommendations for what they're eating afterwards, or do they just go back to their normal diet? Do they do a
That
paleo diet?
obviously
Like,
didn't
is there
work too well for them.
right, right.
You know,
Do you have any specifics there?
when I was in college for nutrition, I studied with Dr. Diadamo,
Oh, okay.
not Peter, his father.
Okay.
Peter
Awesome.
Diadamo's father is the person who did most of the research,
Mm-hmm.
and then Peter made it popular, writing all the books and whatnot. So I'm indoctrinated into the blood type as this as a base fundamental starting point. So we have somebody who's finished with everything, and now we want to put them on a maintenance plan, so to speak. First thing we want to start with is what is their blood type. Now, it's blood type is not it's not always 100% accurate for everyone. Everyone has idiosyncrasies in their genes. But when you're looking at the blood type actually is a genetic program because the type A, the type O, all of these blood types have genetically evolved from certain regions where people ate a certain way. And you can argue two ways. You can argue that the person's body adapted to that way of eating, or you could argue that genetically that's the way they needed to eat because of whatever. It doesn't make any difference to me which end of the stick it is. The fact of the matter is that when you take a type O, type O's evolved from the paleo, the hunter-gatherer. That's what a type O, that's where they come from. If you look at type A's came from areas like in Asia where there were farmers. If you look at the type B comes from the Mediterranean, where they have the Mediterranean diet. So it's not going to be 100. Every single thing in the book is not going to be 100% accurate, and doesn't need to be, because very few sciences you're going to find that will have everything 100% accurate, but it's workable. It's workable because it's starting with the right foundation.
Okay. So do these people, so say someone's a type O, and like, would they generally start off with doing more of a paleo style diet and then see how they feel on it and kind of just alter it from there?
Yes, and we can also tell because in the blood chemistries, people who have a greater need for animal protein, who are not getting it, are going to tend to have BUN levels under maybe 10, depending on the lab. Like a typical BUN is considered to be somewhere between 7 or 8 to maybe 20, 21, depending on the lab. And you're definitely going to see people who genetically have a need for protein. If they're not getting it, their BUN is going to be lower. So that's one way you can tell right off the bat how the person's going to do. If you see they're a low BUN, for those people who don't know, stands for blood urea nitrogen. And blood urea nitrogen is essentially your nitrogen pool that's in your liver that you get from eating protein from your diet.
Okay. Awesome. One more thing about Candida. Do you ever see a connection with mold in the environment?
Well, yeah, there's a few. The first thing to look for is when you're looking at people who live in a moldy house. If you have several people there, let's say you have 5 or 6 people living in the house, you want to look for the person who's the most affected. That person has Candida independently of the house. That person has their own internal mold machine going on, having Candida. And when they're then exposed to the external molds that are in the air from the house, they're being bombarded. Because you're going to note it, you're going to see this. It's phenomenal, where you'll see that there's going to be several people in the house who are really bad off, and other people who appear to be not affected at all, or they're mildly affected. And that's how you can sort them out. The one who's the most affected, or the ones who are the most affected, are the ones who have Candida, and the others don't have Candida. They're just being affected by the molds. They're either breathing them in, or whatever's happening with them.
Okay. Did we miss anything that very specific about any of this that you wanted to touch on?
One thing is that mold in a building or in a house doesn't cause Candida.
Okay. Yeah.
That doesn't happen. What happens when you have mold in your house is you end up breathing in the spores. They mostly will go to your lungs. Some of them will go to your intestinal tract, and you'll have difficulty from that aspect. But we don't even know that that's Candida that's in your house. Person could have Stachybotrys, they could have Aspergillus, they could have all other sorts of molds, which are not even Candida related. Because we know that Candida is native to the intestinal tract, we know that it can overgrow independently of any other situation.
Right.
So we would never assume the person has Candida because they have sick building syndrome or they have moldy house. We would want to test that to find out. And luckily, there are plenty of tests. Great Plains Laboratory has a test called the mycotoxin test, and you can find out very easily through that test what you have going on as far as the molds.
Yes, I like either the Great Plains or the Real Time Labs mycotoxin, and I see that some people will get the IgG antibody test, but I don't. I think that they need to get the mycotoxin test to actually measure the actual levels of the mold toxin itself. So I think people mix that up quite too often.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. Okay. So, and what would you say, like, if someone is listening to this right now and they're like, oh my gosh, this sounds like me right now. What should they do? Where should they start?
First thing they should do is save themselves a lot of trouble. Get on Amazon and buy a copy of my book, The Candida Chronicles,
Okay.
because the book tells you everything you could do wrong and it explains to you how you would do it right. So if you have the book, at least you know when you go to a practitioner, you know where he's at with what his experience is as far as doing it the correct way or the wrong way. So that's the first thing I would say is get a copy of the book and read it. You'll know more than most of the doctors that you end up seeing.
Mm-hmm.
If worst comes to worst, the person can always consult with us because we only do consultations by internet. We don't see people in person. We specialize on seeing people all over the country and all over the world.
Amazing.
So that's our practice has completely evolved into being able to do that routinely, where we have labs all over the country that can do whatever it is we need to do, and it's not a problem. So if they really get stuck and can't find anybody who can help them, then they can always contact us.
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll have everything in the show notes too. We have your website, your YouTube. We'll put the book in there and all of that so people can find that easily. And I have one final question for you, which is if you could leave the listeners with one tip that will help them live a healthier, happier life that they could implement maybe this week, what would it be?
Eat only organic and non-GMO foods.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely repel and shun foods that are non-GMO.
Yes.
The GMO, this whole GMO bit is one of the biggest fallacies that's been portrayed on people. It is incredible. When you look at the fact that the company Monsanto that makes the GMO foods won't allow those foods in their own cafeteria, I think that says a lot. And based on the fact that GMO foods are banned throughout most of Europe, I think that also speaks a lot. But yet in America, we're stupid and we're eating these things.
Completely agree with that.
And we have had leaders who haven't helped us.
Yeah.
Haven't helped us at all. Barack Obama, when he was running for president, said that he was going to eliminate GMO foods. After getting in office, he signed a bill called the Monsanto Protection Act. You guys can go look it up on the internet. The Monsanto Protection Act limits the liability that Monsanto has. If you want to sue Monsanto because you think that their GMO corn gave you a tumor or something, you're limited by that bill.
Mm-hmm.
Which that should not have been. That's just horrendous. Monsanto is the I call them the corporation from hell. These are the people who developed Agent Orange, which is another thing. We get a tremendous amount of Vietnam vets who were exposed to Agent Orange who have Candida and have all types of problems in this arena. It's incredible. They're like a test case. Somebody with Candida, leaky gut, everything you can imagine going on within the concentric circles. It's one thing that we didn't talk about before. We have a way of looking at this whole condition, and it's based on concentric circles. We have a circle in the middle, which is Candida. Then we have one that overlaps into that, which is mercury toxicity. Then you can have another one that's like leaky gut, and that's because all these conditions interrelate with each other.
Right.
So once you get in the loop and you have one, if you have Candida, it's more possible that you're going to develop Epstein-Barr or you'll develop leaky gut. And then depending on if you're metal toxic, that changes the shape of it. And then there's your genetics involved, which is something everyone should be looking into, getting a 23andMe genetic test to look at their genetics. Hopefully in 100 years or 50 years from now, when you go to the doctor is going to open up your folder. He's going to have your genetic test. He's going to know all the SNPs you have, all the illnesses that you're prone to. And then he's going to have all your chemistries of all the deficiencies or imbalances or toxicities you have. And that's how he's going to manage you. He's going to look at where you're weak genetically, and then he's going to want to put you on programs that are going to want to support your weaknesses. That's what medicine should be doing instead of worrying about selling drugs.
Yep. And I'm glad you mentioned the concentric circles, because this goes back to the whole concept of like healing these kinds of issues is not easy. There's so many avenues that we have to look down to really see like what are all of the root causes, what are all of the triggers going on here. And if someone says, oh, just take this product for like 3 weeks, I mean, it's most likely not going to work. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, it's the brave people like you who are out there making all this known.
Yes.
See, because the drug companies aren't going to tell you this.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any drug salesman going to a medical doctor's office and saying, I've got a new probiotic here for you to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to do that because that's not going to make money. You know, there's an old joke in medicine, and there are two things you never want to violate, two rules in medicine you don't want to violate. You never want to hurt the patient. You don't want to kill them, and you don't want to cure them.
Mm.
If you kill them, you lose them as a patient. If you cure them, you lose them as a patient. And the whole idea in the pharmaceutical industry is you have drugs which cover up their symptoms. As you're saying, it's extremely difficult to find the root causes. That's what people in our field are doing. We're trying to correct and address root causes. We're not interested in giving you a pill, and then the fact that your neighbor plays his trumpet too loud bothers you. The pill is now going to alleviate that. We're not giving you a pill that's going to suppress your immune system, that's going to help relieve your psoriasis. We're not looking to give you pills that are going to suppress your symptoms. We want to get to the root cause and correct that. And the picture is much bigger, you see, because if we don't look for root causes and correct the underlying reasons, what happens to this planet? The toxicity that we're spewing all over the place on this planet is part of what's making people sick. Mm-hmm. And if we don't recognize that people get sick due to iatrogenic disease, which is drug-induced, doctor-induced disease. People get sick due to being exposed to toxins from industry. They even get sick from naturally occurring toxins on the planet. If we don't look at all that and know all that, where are we heading?
We're not headed towards a good place. We're not in a good place. But I think that's where, like, you brought up the whole Monsanto thing. It's like we have a choice. This is the reason I do this podcast, is one, so people hear this stuff, and then two, so that they can make that choice every day. Like, you literally have the power in your hands to go and choose to purchase organic foods, or go look up if there's toxins in beauty products or your cookware, and like choose healthier, cleaner things. And as you continue to choose those things, like, we just need to get more and more people to do this, to kind of shift everyone in a different direction. It's definitely not an easy task, though.
It's true, but if we look at, for instance, your story, I know your personal story, and that's right there is a shining example of somebody who didn't give up. They kept looking for the truth. They eventually found it. And why can't other people do that? They can.
Yeah.
They just have to do it.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is a good place to end. This was a great conversation, and I'm glad we got to go super, super deep into the Candida topic. And yeah, thank you so much for being on the show, Michael.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thanks for watching the episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure that you like the video and leave a comment and share it with a friend who really needs to hear it. Because when you share this information, you're also going to help other people level up their health. And if you or somebody else you know wants to work on their health and they're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, feel free to reach out to me to apply to work together. Thanks for watching, and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.